King Alaric Nightborne was a beloved ruler of the realm, a noble vampire with eyes like thunder and a heart, they said, that beat only for his chosen queen. But one day, without warning, he vanished. The crown declared him lost. The court wept, and Elena Ravenshade, the woman who wore his bite above her collarbone like a promise, crumbled beneath the weight of grief. But Alaric wasn't dead. He was watching. Hidden behind cloaks, masked in shadows, the king stalked the halls of his own castle, testing loyalty and love through silence. He left no notes, no orders, only children, 3 pale, silken-haired triplets, Lucian, Morella, and Cassian, who were locked behind doors no one was meant to open, whose laughter faded into whispers, whose bruises were blamed on clumsiness, whose toys lay in perfect, untouched arrangement, as if joy had been staged and forgotten. And while noble women sent condolences and the guards practiced mourning, one woman noticed what others didn't. Agatha Crowmore, a quiet cleaner with nothing to lose, and eyes too sharp to miss the tremble in a child's hand. She didn't believe in ghost stories. She believed in evidence, and what she found in the library one night would unravel the lies that held the kingdom together. When the truth rises from the crypt, who will protect the children of a king who chose silence over love? The cold winds that once howled beyond the castle walls had gone still, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Every torch lining the stone corridors burned low, and every whisper echoed like thunder through the empty throne room. King Alaric Nightborne was gone. No messenger had returned with news. No body had been found. No war had claimed him. One day he was simply absent. His throne stood untouched, its velvet deep red and waiting as if it, too, expected him to reappear. But silence had its own weight, and silence, in the Nightborne court, had always meant danger. Before the disappearance, Alaric was a presence that turned blood cold and hearts obedient. Tall, pale, and carved from centuries of rule, he didn't need to raise his voice. Just a glance could make seasoned generals bow. His eyes, 2 bottomless shards of violet ice, had seen lifetimes, and yet in Elena Ravenshade's presence they softened. She alone had known the warmth beneath the frost, or so she believed. Their bond had been whispered about in corridors and envied in ballrooms. Elena, the golden flame to his dark moon. She wore his favor like armor, and he gave her pieces of himself no one else had ever touched, or so she thought. There were nights when he held her beneath the high towers and spoke of a kingdom reborn, a safer world for the children they would one day raise, a legacy cleansed of betrayal and weakness. And in her naivete, Elena mistook prophecy for promise. The night he vanished, there was no blood, no chaos, no warning. Elena had woken alone in the royal bed, the sheets cold beside her. His cloak was still draped over a chair. His ceremonial ring, a relic of vampire kings before him, rested in a dish as though left behind by accident. But Alaric did nothing by accident. The castle searched. The guards swept every corridor, every dungeon, even the deep, sealed crypts beneath the west wing. The ravens sent to distant outposts returned without answers. Days passed, then weeks. The nobility began to panic behind polished smiles. Rumors flourished like rot. Had he been assassinated? Had he abandoned them? Was he taken by something older than time? But there were those who remembered the look in his eyes before he disappeared. The way he lingered by the children's wing longer than usual. The way he kissed Elena's temple, not her lips, and whispered, "Keep the light alive, no matter how dark it gets." The words felt like goodbye. Some said it was grief that finally forced the crown to declare him dead. Others believed it was fear. The black banners were hung. The tolling bells rang out across the mountains. And Elena, cloaked in black silk in disbelief, stood beside an empty throne, mourning a king whose body was never found. Elena Ravenshade moved like a shadow through the great halls of Nightborne Castle, silent, regal, unreachable, draped in layered silk darker than the sky above the crypts. She had become a living monument to grief. The court called her the widow without a body, though none dared say it to her face. They offered polished condolences, bowed their heads, and stepped aside as she passed, not out of respect, but discomfort. No one knew how to console a woman whose lover had vanished into legend rather than death. Every morning, She sat in the royal chapel alone, hands folded over her lap, her face unreadable beneath her mourning veil. Every night, she returned to the king's chambers, untouched since the day he left. The bed remained perfectly made. His books, his ink quill, even his favorite goblet sat on the carved desk, as if he might return any moment to lift it and smirk at her over the rim. But behind the closed doors, the veil came off. She screamed into pillows, tore letters he had written years before, pressed her hands to the cold stone of the fireplace, and begged it to speak to her. She searched his words, his silences, his smallest gestures, again and again, like someone studying scripture for a sign of divine betrayal. What had she missed? Had she ever truly known him? Had he loved her, or merely found her convenient? The court continued to orbit her like a fading sun. Councils met, nobles whispered, and though none dared challenge her place in palace, Elena could feel her power thinning, like ink bleeding through damp parchment. She hadn't been queen, only chosen, claimed, marked by him, without Alaric. She was an unanchored ghost in a palace of memory. She began to notice the cracks. Servants looked away too quickly. Footsteps echoed from corridors supposedly sealed. Certain rooms, especially the East Wing, were always locked now, and guards rotated with military precision, even though no threat had been named. No one spoke of the children. None acknowledged them, not even in passing. But Elena remembered. She remembered the 3 pale-haired siblings, strange and quiet, with violet eyes just like their father's. She remembered how he had spoken of them as his legacy. She asked once, quietly, where they had gone. The answer came too fast. They'd been taken away for their safety. No names, no destination, just a neatly folded lie, handed to her like a handkerchief. And Elena accepted it, for a time, because mourning turns truth soft, because heartbreak makes liars of those who dare to hope, because she wasn't ready, not yet, to admit the man she had loved might have left her not by tragedy, but by choice. The east wing of Nightborne Castle no longer echoed with laughter. It was silent now, except for the faint creak of old wood and the hush of cautious breathing behind locked doors. The curtains remained drawn at all hours, casting the halls in a permanent half-light that blurred the passage of day and night. Dusk settled more quickly here, as though time itself had slowed. Lucian, Mirella, and Cassian lived in rooms too large for comfort and too cold for sleep. Triplets, though none were truly identical. Lucian was the quietest, the one who counted cracks in the ceiling and whispered to shadows when he thought no one was listening. Mirella kept her hair in perfect braids and lined her shoes side by side each night, waiting for someone to praise her order. Cassian, the youngest by minutes, dreamed with his eyes open and flinched whenever someone raised their voice. They had once played in the sunlit courtyard with laughter that chased the birds away, but now they spoke in murmurs and tiptoed even when alone. Their rooms were lined with tall bookshelves, velvet chairs, and shelves of brightly colored toys, untouched, immaculate, positioned carefully like offerings, dolls with unblinking eyes, wooden castles never stormed, spinning tops that had long since stilled. Mirella sat beside a music box. She refused to wind. "He said would play for us when we were safe again," she whispered, fingers hovering over the crank. But safety was a word they'd stopped believing in. Each child had a list of rules, handwritten and nailed to their bedroom doors. Do not speak unless asked. Do not leave your room unless summoned. Do not cry. Do not ask about your father. The punishments came from voices behind the door. Servants who never met their eyes. Guards who dragged them back if they wandered too far. Mirella's wrist had bruised last week. Lucian's lip was still healing. Cassian hadn't spoken in 3 days. They didn't understand what they'd done wrong, only that their world had shifted from warmth to warning, that doors had become walls, that adults now avoided them, as though their very presence was a threat. Sometimes, late at night, Lucian would press his ear to the floorboards. He swore he could hear footsteps in the tunnels beneath the east wing, not the guards. Something slower, a presence moving with intention, watching. They had spoken to their father once. Just once. Cassian had whispered he wouldn't let this happen, and Mirella had grabbed his hand so tightly her nails left marks. Lucian had only said, "Maybe he doesn't know." But even that sounded hollow now. There was a painting of the king in the far library, tall, stern, radiant in his velvet and silver. The triplets had once stood before it as toddlers, all wide-eyed and giggling. Now they passed like a grave marker. Morella had drawn a smile on one of the dolls. A crude, red curve. She said it looked better that way. Lucian hid a broken toy soldier beneath the floorboard where the wood creaked loudest, as if it might guard them. Cassian still slept with a blanket their father gave him the day he was born. It no longer smelled like him. Sometimes, in the long hours when no one came, they wondered if they were still royal, or just secrets too dangerous to be seen. The shadows of Nightborne Castle had always obeyed him. Even now, they bent around his figure as he moved. Silent, cloaked, unrecognized. The king was not dead. Alaric Nightborne was very much alive. He walked the corridors not as a ruler, but as a wraith in servant's garb, hood drawn, posture hunched, eyes a dull brown thanks to spellwork cast with shaking hands. No one looked twice at a hunch cleaner. That was the point. They passed him in the halls with muttered orders or tired glances, never realizing the predator beneath the fabric. It was a strange thing to haunt one's own kingdom. He watched Elena from behind arched doorways and cracked study doors. She cried less now, but he saw it. The stiff way she held her shoulders, the way her fingers curled over the locket he gave her, how she hesitated before entering his chambers as though expecting his ghost, or hoping for it. He told himself this was love, that this pain was necessary, that if she could mourn him and still stand, she was worthy of what came next. And the children would survive. They had to. He observed them, too. Lucian pacing like a cornered animal, counting his steps. Morella whispering instructions to her dolls, asking them to be brave. Cassian curled under a desk, arms around his knees, rocking gently to a rhythm no one else heard. They were learning. They were adapting. Alaric's children would not be soft. There were moments, brief, dangerous moments, when he nearly revealed himself. Morella had looked up suddenly while he stood just beyond the glass of the East Wing's garden corridor. Her eyes narrowed, lips parted, but she said nothing, and he disappeared into the ivy before her mind could catch up. He justified the secrecy like a blade honed in ritual. This was his burden. He had to know what they became without him, had to see which loyalties fractured and which truths survived fire. Yet doubt was creeping in. He'd overheard one of the guards speak of Cassian's silence with a chuckle. The man's tone was mocking, dismissive. It had taken all of Alaric's control not to rip the breath from his lungs and feed on it slowly. But a king in hiding has no throne to punish from. Sometimes he lingered outside Elena's chamber door, listening to the creak of her footsteps as she walked from mirror to window, searching for something she couldn't name. She still wore his ring on a chain, still spoke his name like a prayer. But prayers turned bitter when left unanswered too long. This was for the greater good. He reminded himself every night before disappearing into the catacombs. Control was not cruelty. Love was not indulgence. Power demanded solitude, sacrifice, and above all, perspective. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see were 3 children behind locked doors and a woman in black silk, waiting for a man who no longer had the right to return. Agatha Crowmore had cleaned castles before. Palaces, too. Enough to know where secrets like to settle. In the corners where dust collected undisturbed. In the drawers that never quite closed. In the stains scrubbed a little too hard. But Nightborne Castle was different. It breathed lies into the stone itself. She wasn't meant to be in the East Wing. Her assignment was kitchens and minor guest corridors. But routes twisted sometimes, and people forgot which hall she was sweeping. Or maybe they remembered too well. She'd learned not to ask. The first time she saw one of the children, it was Lucian. He was sitting behind a marble pillar, knees pulled to his chest, his lips moving without sound. He didn't flinch when he saw her. He froze, like prey that had heard a twig snap in the forest. Agatha didn't speak, just nodded and kept walking. But she noticed the bruising under his eye, the way he pressed his palms flat to the floor like it grounded him. A week later, she caught sight of Morella. The girl was carrying a tray too heavy for her, hands trembling as she walked the hall outside the sealed study. Her left wrist was wrapped in cloth, poorly, too tight. Agatha said nothing then either, just moved her broom a little slower as the child passed. But questions began to settle in her bones. Why were the children here at all? Why did no one mention them? She never saw them eat in the hall, never heard them spoken of in the servants' quarters, and yet she cleaned smudged fingerprints off the library glass too low to belong to adults. She found a hand-drawn sketch of a man with sharp cheekbones and violet eyes tucked between the pages of a forgotten ledger. On the back, don't forget his face. The air grew colder in the east wing. Not temperature, but tension, as if the walls were listening, as if something waited behind them. Cashin passed her once, scurrying too fast, eyes wide, shoulders hunched. She murmured a greeting, but he ran. She started noticing small things out of place. A book wedged behind a shelf, as if shoved in haste. Dry blood on a cracked tile near the base of stair. A child's ribbon caught in the iron of a grate. Always something a little wrong. Then there were the footsteps. Light ones, like bare feet. Sometimes heavy, slow, deliberate. The children heard them, too. Agatha had found a toy near the servants' stairwell, its head torn off, and when she'd gone to return it, she heard Morella behind the door whispering, "Don't move. Don't let it know we're awake." And Elena had begun asking questions. Soft ones, at first, phrased as passing thoughts. Had anyone seen Cashin today? Had Lucian's meals been taken to his chamber? Or did someone forget again? Why had the music room been locked for over a month? But no one gave her answers. They gave her reassurances. Smiles with too many teeth. Deflections wrapped in protocol. Elena didn't push. Not yet, but her eyes no longer swept the halls like a grieving lover. They searched. Agatha watched her from a distance and wondered how much she truly wanted to know. Because knowing, really knowing, meant unraveling the story everyone had agreed to tell. And the deeper Agatha looked, the more it felt like the truth wasn't buried. It was being held down. Agatha Crowmore had been invisible her entire life. It was a skill more than a curse. People talked around invisible women. They assumed forgetfulness, weakness, simplicity. They mistook silence for ignorance. And in a castle like this one, where power lived behind paintings and rot beneath silk, that kind of invisibility was dangerous in the right hands. She began to take the longer routes. At first, she told herself it was habit. Old bones preferred gradual inclines to narrow servant stairs. But soon her feet led her down hallways she had no right to clean, into chambers long abandoned by memory. She stopped asking permission. No one questioned her. No one noticed. She started a journal, scribbled in tiny, sharp strokes between cracks in her work schedule. Times, places, patterns, where the triplets were seen, who came near them, who didn't, what bruises appeared and how often. She noted who delivered their meals, who took away their trays untouched. And she began to draw a different kind of map, one made of silences and locked doors and lies. The triplets weren't being raised. They were being hidden. She found a torn child's drawing beneath the staircase rug. 3 figures. One taller, reaching for the others. A crown above his head. The word father spelled wrong, but clear. The paper had boot prints on it. In the laundry cellar, she overheard 2 maids whispering. One said Morella had spoken out of turn during lessons and was corrected. The other mentioned a scream. They spoke low and fast, like women who wanted to forget the words even as they said them. One crossed herself. The other said they should have stayed dead with him. Agatha gripped her broom tighter until her knuckles cracked. She noticed strange marks in the hallway outside the triplets' rooms. Scratches along the lower parts of the wall, like small fingers had clawed at the stone. And the locks on their doors were newer than the rest of the castle hardware. 2 clean, recently installed. Then came the night she followed the guard. She kept her distance, feet silent against the velvet runners. The man moved with practiced ease, carrying a silver-banded cane he didn't use to walk. He stopped outside Lucian's room, knocked twice. No answer. He opened the door anyway. Agatha waited. 1 minute. 2. A muffled voice. A pause. Then a sound that didn't belong in any nursery. The sharp snap of something breaking. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, but her legs remembered the path back to her closet. Later, When she returned, hours later, pretending to sweep the hallway, she found a smear of dried blood near the baseboard and a single black chess piece lying just outside the door, a knight, its carved horse head snapped in half. She held it in her hand for a long time. Something had to be done. Someone had to do it. She wasn't noble, she wasn't brave, but she had eyes, and what she saw could no longer be cleaned away. It was time to stop pretending she didn't. Elena was in the solarium when Agatha found her, alone, seated beneath the pale glass dome that filtered in what little sun could pierce the clouds above Nightborne Castle. She was staring into a teacup she hadn't touched, her fingers motionless around its delicate rim. Outside the window, the ivy clung to stone like a noose. Agatha didn't clear her throat or bow. She walked straight in, uninvited, the hem of her apron smudged with ash and dust. For a moment, Elena didn't notice her. She was somewhere else, some memory where the light was warmer, the silence kinder. "I need to speak with you," Agatha said. Elena turned slowly. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes flashed with faint irritation, the way nobles looked when the world intruded on grief. "You were not summoned." "No," Agatha said, but the children didn't summon their bruises either. The words hit like a cracked bell, too loud, too wrong. Elena blinked, as though she hadn't heard correctly. "What did you say?" Agatha stepped closer. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't soften. "Lucian flinches every time he hears boots in the corridor. Morella doesn't sleep through the night. Cashin hasn't spoken in days. There's blood on their walls, bruises on their arms, and locks on their doors. And everyone looks the other way, including you." Elena stood. "That's enough." "No, it isn't," Agatha said. "I know what this castle does to secrets. I've scrubbed them out of stone. But you knew those children. You loved their father. You swore he was a man who would never abandon his own." The cup shattered in Elena's hand. She hadn't meant to grip it so tightly, but the porcelain fell in sharp white pieces to the marble floor, blood blooming from her palm. "They told me they were taken for their safety," she whispered. "They told me." "They lied," Agatha said. "And deep down, you know it." There was silence, heavy, suffocating. Elena's hand trembled. She looked at the blood pooling in her palm, as if unsure whether it belonged to her. "I saw the drawing," Agatha said quietly. "The one Morella made of him, their father. She still believes he's coming back. Still thinks he didn't leave them." Elena's voice cracked. "He wouldn't. He loved them." "Then where is he?" That question broke her. Elena sank to the nearest chair, like her bones had turned to glass. Her chest heaved once, then again, and suddenly the room wasn't made of glass anymore. It was a cage, and every promise Alaric had ever whispered turned to knives in her throat. She had told herself the children were safe, told herself not to ask too many questions, because if she did, she might learn the truth, and the truth would cost her everything she had left of him. Agatha knelt. She didn't reach for Elena. She just let the silence stretch, because sometimes the breaking had to be complete before anything could be rebuilt. When Elena finally looked up, her eyes were no longer clouded with mourning. They burned. "Show me," she said, and Agatha nodded. The throne room had not seen a full court assembly in months, but word spreads quickly in places built from stone and suspicion. By midday, nobles in stiff collars and polished rings lined the hall, their whispers rising like smoke toward the high vaulted ceiling. Tension curled in every corner. No one knew why they had been summoned. Only that Lady Elena's voice had carried an authority that hadn't been heard since the king disappeared. She stood at the base of the dais, not seated, not adorned. No crown, no veil, only dark crimson velvet trailing behind her like dried blood. Agatha stood just inside the chamber doors, silent, unnoticed by most, except the guards who now watched her with unease. Then the doors opened again. The man who entered was not dressed as a king. No jewels, no crest, only a long, nondescript cloak and hood, and yet something about his presence shifted the air. Those closest to him stepped back instinctively, not from fear, from recognition their minds hadn't yet caught up to. Elena didn't move. Her hands were clenched at her sides. Alaric removed the hood slowly. The gasp that followed was almost a sigh, half relief, half horror. Faces turned white. A few dropped to their knees out of reflex. Others stepped backward, as if the dead had just risen. He stood still, gaze sweeping the court with that same ancient calm, as if daring them to speak first, as if daring them to deny him. "Your Majesty," one lord finally whispered, a title laced with confusion, not reverence. "You're alive," Elena said, her voice low, sharp, "and you let us bury a ghost." Alaric's gaze settled on her. "I had to see the truth for myself." "The truth?" Her voice cracked like a whip now. "What truth demands bruises on your children? What truth needs chains and locked doors and silence?" Gasps rippled through the room. Alaric didn't flinch. "Not chains. Lessons. Spoken like a man who's never begged a child to stop shaking," she hissed. "They thought you were dead. I thought you were dead. And you watched. You watched." The court fell silent. Alaric turned slowly, facing them all. "I needed to know who could be trusted, what loyalty looked like in absence, who could survive without me." A nobleman stepped forward, furious. "We nearly crowned a successor. Armies were mobilizing. This kingdom bled in your absence. And yet here we stand," Alaric said coldly, "revealed." But Elena took a step toward him, and this time it wasn't out of grief. It was out of fury. "You hid behind shadows while your children were broken in your name," she said. "Don't speak to me of revelation. This isn't truth. It's cowardice dressed as strategy." He said nothing. She climbed the first step of the dais and looked him full in the face. The man she once trusted above all others. Now just a man. No mask, no myth, just a father who chose silence over saving them. And the king who might not deserve his crown anymore. The throne stood empty. Alaric remained at its base, unmoving, as if still deciding whether he had the right to ascend it again. The court watched in stunned silence, some waiting for a command, others silently hoping it never came. But the power in the room had shifted. It no longer pulsed from the man who had once ruled. It radiated from the woman who stood above him, voice unshaken, eyes bright with grief turned to fire. Elena faced the court, her voice steady. "This kingdom has been ruled by fear masquerading as wisdom. It ends now." She turned to Alaric. "I loved you," she said, not softly, not kindly, just honestly. "But love that demands children suffer to prove loyalty is not love. It is poison." She stepped aside, revealing the triplets at the far end of the chamber. Lucian, pale and stiff as stone. Morella, gripping her siblings' hands like lifelines. Cassian, eyes wide but unblinking. They said nothing. They didn't have to. Their presence was a verdict long before the court could speak one. Alaric's eyes flicked toward them, but none of the children moved, not even when he took a step forward. "No," Elena said. "It wasn't loud, but it was final. You may live," she told him, "but not here, not as king, not as father." There was no ceremony, no guards dragging him away, just a man stripped of everything he thought made him powerful, walking out of the throne room while the court parted like mist. When the doors closed behind him, the silence was no longer heavy. It was clean. Elena knelt before the children. Morella was the first to fall into her arms. Then Lucian. Then Cassian. They clung to her like breath itself. She didn't promise to make it perfect, only better. And for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, the kingdom began to heal.